Let's examine several different methods of implementing sound in your Java projects. The first method we'll examine is the AudioClip class. Java's AudioClip class allows you to play AU files, providing the means to use sound effects and background music in your applications. To use it, you must import Java Applet AudioClip. The advantage of using AudioClips is that they are native to Java, so there is no need to download or install extra libraries, and they offer good platform independence. A disadvantage to using AudioClips is that they do not support compressed audio formats like MP3s. Therefore, file sizes are larger and project sizes balloon quickly when filling them with uncompressed audio files. There are three primary methods when using AudioClip objects. They are play, loop, and stop. These methods are self-explanatory. To implement AudioClip objects in your projects involves a three-step process. First, declare an AudioClip object. Second, associate it with an AU sound file using applet get audio clip if you are creating a JAPPLET, and applet new audio clip if you are creating a JFrame. Third, call the appropriate method on the AudioClip object, play, loop, or stop. AudioClip objects may perhaps be the easiest way to implement sound in your Java projects. However, you may still encounter complications, such as when trying to retrieve an AudioClip object from a compressed jar archive, such as when a JAPPLET is embedded within a web page. In a situation like that, you don't want to use a simple string for the file name, but you'll need a URL object. Here's an example of a helper method called getLocation that will return a URL when I pass in the file name of a string. It uses the method getClass to get where the class and codebase is, and then it uses the function getResource to pull the sound file from the compressed jar archive. I can then play it. In this example, if you look at the bottom, I'm building a new AudioClip object called X, and then I'm calling applet new AudioClip. I'm calling my helper function getLocation to return a URL, which will then retrieve end_need_a-key.au from my compressed jar archive. Here's an example in code. In this example, as a global, I'm instantiating a new audio clip called theme music. Then in the init method, I'm simply going to call the function new audio clip, and when I do this, I'm going to use the helper function getLocation to return a URL, which uses getClass to get the codebase and class, and getResource to retrieve the AU file out of a compressed jar archive. When I do this, I'll load piratetheme.au, and then I'm simply going to call the play method on it to play it one time. If I wanted to loop it continuously, I could call loop, and if I wanted to stop it, I would simply call stop on my instance theme music. So let's test it out. You can see it loads the sound file. As a matter of fact, I'm using the same technique on all of these projects that we've been using in previous videos, such as games Pirate Arena, Mutant Wars, Poly Battlefield, and so forth. A tool that you can use to convert WAV and MP3 files to files in the AU format so you can make them audio clips is Audacity, and it's an open source free tool that you can download. Just Google for Audacity. The version I have here is version 1.2.6, and I'll just go through the install process. And I'll launch Audacity, choosing my language, English. And in this example, let me go here and Preferences, and then let me go to File Formats. And notice you can choose, in this case, different file formats. And in this case, I'm going to select 8-bit AU, which will give me the smallest file size, although not necessarily the best quality. When I do this, notice that I'll have the option here to export as AU files. And just as an example, let's say that I want to load either an MP3 or a WAV file. So let me go down to, let's see, music, and let me go here, 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 and let's see, I don't know, we'll load up this file here, this MP3. So if I wanted to convert that to an AU file, now because I set the options here under Preferences, I also have that option. So I'm going to go File and Export as AU, and I'll just throw it into, not really going to keep this, I'll just throw it on my D drive. Okay, and once I do this, if I were to go and browse my D drive, and there's my new AU file there. The second method of implementing audio we'll look at is using JMF. The JMF, or Java Media Framework, is a library that you can add to your projects that will play video and audio in compressed formats like MP3. It is not built into the JDK, so to use it, you have to do several things. First, download the JMF archive, jmf.jar, or installer an MP3 plugin, mp3plugin.jar. Here's where I got them. If the URLs change, just Google for them and save them to your local system. Next, install the installer or extract it to your Java, JRE, and JDK directories. For me, this is currently C, program files Java JRE7 lib, and C, program files Java JDK170 lib. You can just copy the jmf.jar and mp3plugin.jar files to your JRE lib subdirectory or your project folder. It doesn't really matter as long as you know where to find them when you add them to your project. Your directories may be different if you are in Linux, another operating system, or just a different setup of Windows 7. Alternatively, you could add it to your Java class path. Third, create a new NetBeans Java project. I'm currently using NetBeans 7.1. Fourth, add an empty class file to the project. When you've done this, right-click on the project and select Properties on the pop-up menu and navigate to the Libraries section under Sources in the Project Properties window. Click the Add Jar folder button and then add the jmf.jar and mp3plugin.jar files you downloaded and copied to your JDK and JRE lib directories above to the Libraries node of the project. Seventh, click on OK, and finally, code one of the following examples. Here's an example of how to play an MP3 file using the JMF. Before we get started, remember first we have to right-click on our project, go to Properties, go down to Libraries. We have to add in the JMF jar and mp3plugin.jar files. Now, I just click on Add Jar Folder, and then I add them in that way. If you can't find them, Google for them, and you can copy them to the JRE or JDK folder. It doesn't really matter where you put them, as long as you can find them and click on Add Jar and Folder and add them into the project. Then click on OK when you're done, and you're ready to start coding. Now, look at all of these items here that I'm importing from the media package, as well as the swing package and then IO, because I'm going to do system.print to illustrate the path to the file. Here we're extending a JAPPLET, so it's a JAPPLET program, adding a JLabel just to give it a title, and of course a layout manager, flow layout. Once we do this, I'm going to instantiate three format objects, in this case MPEG layer 3, MPEG, and linear, and they all come from the audio format object. When I do this, I'm also going to set, in this case, the plugin with plugin manager.addPlugin. And I'm going to place a call out to COM, SUN, Media, Codec, Audio, MP3, Java Decoder. When I do this, I'm going to build another new format object, in this case an array, and input MP3 and input MPEG, which I declared earlier up here. I'm also going to, in this case, build an array with just one element, which is my output format object that I built up here. And all of this, if you look at it, goes inside the parentheses as a parameter or argument to the method addPlugin on the plugin manager object. Okay, once I do that, then all of this needs to be inside of a try block. And I'm going to, in this case, set up my string. This is my directory, and this is the file that I want to play somewhere over the rainbow, .mp3. When I do this, I'm going to call the method getFileLocation, and this is just a helper function that returns a string, and it'll call getClass to get the code base in class, and getResource to pull out an object if it were in a jar archive or wherever it might be located. Once I do this, I have to do a little bit of massaging here to the string to set up the path to get it to play the way that I want. So in this case, I'm going to go find all of these forward slashes, and I'm going to convert them to backward slashes instead. Well, double backward slashes, because remember that's an escape sequence in Java. And then once I do that, I'm also going to peel off 7 characters there in a substring, which would be like the file name colon and the space part there. And then I'm just going to return that. So that's all that function does, getFileLocation. And then I'm going to print the result so you can see what it looks like in the console. Finally, I'm going to take my player object, build an instance of it called player, and then I'm going to call manager.createPlayer. And when I do this, I'm going to create or instantiate as a parameter a new media locator object, and then a new file object, which will be my sound file, and then call the method toURI and then toURL to convert it to a URL. And finally, I'm going to call the start method to start playing the file. And then I just have to catch an exception in this case in case something goes wrong in my try block. So a bit involved, but not really too much code to be able to handle or play a compressed audio file like an MP3. So let's test it out and see how it works. And this is the standalone version. And you can see here's the path or the file name string that was generated. Here's a second example of using the JMF to play a compressed MP3 file. Now this example uses two classes because we're going to do it as a separate threaded process. And this would be useful in something like a game where maybe we want one thread to play this MP3 and then we want to use other threads to do other things like animate or draw graphics on the screen. So in this example, first we have the class MP3 player and it extends thread, so this is going to become the foundation of our threaded process. Notice we have to import the media package. We have two globals here, in this case an instance of the player class called MP3 player and a string called file path. In our constructor, whenever we build or construct an MP3 player, we're going to pass in a string, and that's going to be both the directory or path to the file and the file name. And then that gets stored as file path. Okay, in the run method of our thread, we're going to, in try blocks, call create player, and this from our instance of the player class MP3 player that'll call manager.createPlayer. It's going to call the function getClass to go find where the class and codebase are and getResource to retrieve the sound file. Now, because this is in try blocks, we have to have the right catch blocks. We have to catch an IO exception, and in addition, we also have to catch a media no player exception here. Once we do that, then down here we can call the method addControllerListener, and we call that once again on our instance of the player class called MP3 player. Well, as a parameter, as an argument, you can see by the two parentheses that are highlighted here, all of this is the argument, right? We're going to create a new controller listener, and then we're going to implement controller update, and if we need to, if it's an instance of endMedia event, we'll call stop and close. Finally, we're going to call the realize method and then the start method to play the file in this class. Now that's our threaded player class. Let's look at the other class that will actually build and use the MP3 player class object. In this case, MP3 player threaded.java. So this just extends JAPPLET. That's going to be our interface. Adds a couple of J labels. And now we're going to come down here and inside the init method, just like in the previous example, we're going to construct three format objects. An MPEG layer 3, an MPEG, and a linear for output. We're going to call plugin manager just like we did before, and we're going to call the method add plugin on the plugin manager object. In this case, we're going to load COM, SUN, media, codec, audio, MP3, Java, decoder. And then we're going to instantiate two arrays here. The first having two elements, our format objects input MP3 and input MPEG, and the second having one element, in this case our format object output. When we do this, we're going to set up the directory, in this case music, and then we're going to set up the file name somewhere over the rainbow MP3. We're just going to concatenate those two strings together, and then we're going to take that whole string and we're going to pass it into the constructor here of our MP3 player class object. And when we do that, we're building an instance of it, calling it theme music, and we're calling the start method or function on our instance here. So let's test it out. And again, you can see how that works. Note, the JMF can be somewhat limited sometimes. It can play MP3s in JFrame applications and in JAPPLETs, but it has issues with jar archives. A better selection for playing compressed audio from jar archives might be the Jlayer MP3 library, which we'll talk about next. A third method of implementing audio in your Java projects is using the Jlayer MP3 library. Jlayer is a third-party MP3 library for the Java platform from www.javazine.net. It is currently a free download. It is easier to install than the JMF, and it is more versatile in that it can play compressed MP3 audio files quite easily from a compressed jar archive. To use it, you will need to, first, Google for and download jl1.0.jar. I found it at this location, or you can go to www.javazoom.net as described above. Next, copy it to your project folder and add it to your class path. In NetBeans, this involves the following steps. Create a new NetBeans Java project. I'm currently using NetBeans 7.1. Add an empty class file to the project. Right-click on the project, select Properties on the pop-up menu, and navigate to the Libraries section under Sources in the Project Properties window. Then, click the Add Jar Folder button and add the jl1.0.jar file you downloaded and copied to your project folder above to the Libraries node of the project. Finally, you only need to click on OK and then code the following example. Here in this example, as we did previously, we need to right-click on the project, go to Properties, go to Libraries. We have to add the jar or folder. In this case, it was jl1.0.jar that we downloaded. And then we click OK, and once we've added that to the project, we're ready to go. Now this particular example uses two classes. We have a player class, and then we have a class that's going to build an instance of the player and call the play method on it and use it to play an MP3. So I left this in these comment tags here, which I got from their website, www.javazoom.net, just so you can see some of the command line options for adding things to the class path and compiling. And now here are our imports, these three packages, Java IO buffered input stream, and we need a player from our JL package here, our Java Zoom package. So we have two globals here, in this case a string file name and a player object, and the instance we'll just call lowercase player. We have a constructor that takes a string, and that's the file name and the path to the file. Comes in and we'll save that. We have a close method, and it's simply going to call the close function on player if it's not null. We have the play function here, and when we call play, you can see all the code happens between this open and closing curly brace here. Well, in a try block, we build an instance of input stream, and we're going to call get class and get resource as stream, in this case to pull it out of a jar archive. And this way, if it's in a compressed jar archive and embedded in a web page, it'll still be able to find our MP3 or sound file resource. So get class.get resources stream. There's our input stream. Next, we're going to build an instance of buffered input stream, and when we do that, as the parameter or the argument, we're going to pass in our instance of input stream, which use get class and get resources stream to pull things from, in this example, a jar archive. Finally, when we do that, we're going to instantiate our player object with new and player, and we're going to pass in our buffered input stream object as the argument to the constructor. When we do this, because all of that was inside of a try block, we have to have a catch block. And in this example, here's what we have to catch, just a generic exception. And we'll just say what it was. Hey, there was a problem playing the file, blah, blah, blah. Finally, down here, we're going to build a new thread. So we build a new thread, and then we implement the run method for that thread, which is going to be, in this case, playing our player object. We'll call the play method on it. And we have to catch an exception, interrupted exception, whatever we want to catch. In this case, just a plain vanilla generic exception. But since that was in a try block, we need a corresponding catch block as well. And then finally, we're just going to go ahead and start the thread right there. So all of that from www.javazoom.com, that would be sort of our base player class there, and we could reuse this class over and over to play all kinds of MP3s as a threaded process. Well, here's a class that I wrote just to make use of, in this case, our MP3 player object there. So I'm going to import the Abstract Windows Toolkit and Swing packages, just some components we need there. Add some JLabels. Here's an instance of our MP3 player class that we built from our javazoom.net, and it's going to be called music. Inside the init method, we're going to set up our JAPPLET just by setting flow layout and adding our three JLabel components there. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and instantiate our MP3 player object, our sound underscore JZ underscore MP3 object called music with new. We'll build it, and we're going to pass in a string with both the directory and the file name as an argument. And then finally, we're going to call the play method to play the MP3 file. And of the two methods, using the JMF or using the Java Zoom way, the Java Zoom way is my favorite. It seems to be the most compatible with loading things out of a jar archive and websites and so forth. But you decide. You try them all and see what you like. Anyway, let's test it out. So we'll run the test class to build an instance of the player class. And that's how it works.